John Constantine, a Hellblazer podcast.
Hey there, everybody, and welcome back. Before we get into the episode, just want to let you know that this is the free version of the podcast, and all that means is that we are way behind where I'm at in Patreon. So if you are loving this podcast and you need more John Constantine in your life, definitely go check us out at patreon.com/planes, trains, and comic books and sign up for the Hellblazer tier, where you'll get access to the entire Hellblazer library that I've recorded so far. And also you'll get access to the exclusive episodes of the Planes, Trains, and Comic Books main podcast. So if any of that sounds good to you, definitely go over to patreon.com/planes, trains, and comic books, all one word, and sign up there. And with that out of the way, let's get into the issue. Today we're doing Hellblazer number 82, and just a little catch up on what's been going on in the story. In the last issue, John was hiding out in a church from the First of the Fallen. He was just like hiding out in the basements. He'd put sigils everywhere. And the priest of the church found him, and they had a big conversation about all the stuff John's worried about. And over the course of the whole night of them talking, John realizes that the First isn't looking for him because none of his sigils are lighting up, meaning that the First of the Fallen is not searching desperately nearby. So John has decided to take the fight to him. Also in the background, we got a couple other storylines of John's friends. One of John's old girlfriends named Helen was addicted to heroin, and she had become a prostitute. So John took her off the street away from her pimp and is forcing her to detox. And unfortunately, the pimp did find her in John's apartment, and he physically assaulted her, but luckily Chaz came in the room right as that was going on, and the pimp ran away. And in the last issue, John was so mad about this that he told Chaz to hire a couple of leg breakers to find Phil the pimp and go to town on him. Also in the background, there's been a large riot happening where the brother of one of John's friends named George has been hiding out from the police after police killed his mother and he killed one of them. So we saw the police gather in force and the people of the neighborhood start to protest that. Then the cops started shooting large rubber bullets into the crowd and killed someone, causing the people of the neighborhood to riot and fight back. So as all this craziness was starting, we saw George in the crowd with all his friends, and unfortunately all of George's friends met a horrible ending at the hands of the police. But George was able to get away, so he is still on the run. And the reason that this is a problem to John isn't because of George's situation necessarily. It is because these riots just happen to be in the same town that Nigel lives in. And John has been trying to figure out how to get to Nigel through this whole riot and the trigger-happy police. So that is where we left off in the last issue. So first things first, with issue 82, we got the cover. We see John and a woman who kind of looks like Kit are walking through the rain. They're both smiling at each other like everything's great. And they look like they're having a grand old time being in each other's company. And we also see on this cover that this is written by Garth Ennis with art by Steve Dillon. And as we turn to the first page, our suspicions about who the woman is on the cover are confirmed as we get a full page splash of Kit and John kissing in a pub. And not just like secretly at a table or something. They're like standing in the middle of this pub. All the other patrons can see them and they're kind of awkwardly watching, but it seems like John and Kit don't care. The only thing that matters at this moment is each other. And we see on this page also that the name of this issue is Rake at the Gates of Hell Part 5. So eventually the kiss, stops, and Kit kind of looks at John very dreamily as they pull away, and she kind of sighs to herself, and John looks at her and says, "What?" And she just looks at him with her dreamy eyes and says, "Hello, John." And then John kind of smiles and goes in for a hug, and as they hug, he says, "Hello, Kit." And it seems like John is a bit nervous, obviously because, Kit broke his heart. And the last time he saw her, they were like yelling at each other. So he's kind of silent as they sit down back at their table. And Kit looks at him and says, "Well, say something. I didn't come all the way back here just for that, I can get kissed all I want in Belfast." And at this, John kind of loses heart for a second and he kind of looks sad. But she begins to laugh because she was just joking. And she says, "Say something, John. Even if it's only funny old world, isn't it? Something." And that kind of breaks the ice. So John kind of chuckles and he says, "Sorry, I wasn't things. It's just been, all over the gaff. And, well, you." But Kit cuts him off and says, I know. Let's go somewhere else, sure. Do you fancy heading down towards Covenant Garden? Or do you think it's still too poncy? And John is able to make out, well, yeah, but I don't mind. So they pay and then they walk out. And as they're going through the pub, we can see all the other people that were seeing them kiss before are leering at them, probably assuming that they're leaving so quickly because they're going to go have sex. And John sees them and kind of gets offended. He gets a sour look on his face. So as they get outside, Kit asks John, "What are you giving them the evil eye for?" And John replies, bloody kids are all smartasses these days. And Kit says, "Oh, come on." And John looks at her kind of confused and says, "What?" And Kit replies, "Sure, do you not remember when you were that age and you saw old people snogging and it nearly made you want to be sick?" And this offends John even more and he says, "We're not old people." And then Kit smiles and says, "Well, I know I'm not." So obviously Kit is trying to have a conversation here, but there's definitely an air of awkwardness between them. So John just bypasses this whole small talk thing and gets right to the point asking, "Why'd you come back?" And Kit doesn't say anything. She just kind of pauses, but then it begins to rain, and then they begin running to try to get out of the rain. And they end up finding shelter across the street as they stand under an overhang in front of a shop. So as they stand there, Kit says, "Chaz gave us a few ideas where to find you." And John replies, "Chaz did?" And Kit answers, "Aye, Chaz. Poor old Chaz. He was telling me how the pair of yous lost touch for a while. You're a man who inspires the maximum loyalty for the minimum effort. Do you know that?" But John doesn't answer her. He just looks at the rain as it gets harder and he says, "It's not stopping." And Kit replies, "Maybe it'll calm down all that business in Tower Hamlets. Saw that on the telly." And John replies, "Yeah, I was trying to get in there earlier." And Kit kind of smiles at this because John has always been one to avoid danger. So she says, "Surely not you." And John replies, "Need to see a mate. That's why I'm in such shit order. I haven't slept since Monday night. And I was on my way down there on the tube when I thought I'd rest my eyes for a minute. Woke up at Sodden Heathrow. Took me 2 hours to get back this far." And Kit says, "Hi, I was wondering why you weren't as smart looking as usual." And John jokingly replies, "Don't know what you mean, love. I could look class in a bin liner if I wanted to." And Kit agrees with him, saying, "You do." And at this, I guess John has decided that they've been waiting for the rain to stop long enough, and it's not going to. So he just pushes Kit out into the rain, and then he starts walking too. But of course, John has his trench coat, and Kit is just out in a skirt and blouse and a small jacket, but nothing compared to John's. So as they walk in the rain, Kit yells out, "Oh, John, come on. I'm getting soaked." And basically, she just wants John to let her use his coat. But he says back to her, "Oh, no. I wouldn't dare suggest her ladyship shelter under such a piece of old tat as my raincoat." And she yells back at him, "You rotten get." And as she catches up to him in the rain, she smiles and says, "See you. Do you want to get something decent to eat instead of that desperate-looking pie you had in the pub?" And John jokingly asks, "So pub grub's not good enough for you either?" And she jokingly replies, But that's not what you were having, is it? You were at the Red Rover having one of their monkey bollocks specials." And John replies, "Oh, charming." Then he thinks for a second and says, "Well, do you fancy a curry or something?" And Kit answers, "Italian." And at this, John kind of looks sheepish and says, "I'm a bit stony on it," meaning that he's a bit short on cash for something as fancy as Italian. But Kit doesn't seem to mind. She just says, "My treat." Then we cut to them in the restaurant eating, and John is eating some sort of steak, and she is eating a plate of vegetables. And as John eats, he asks, "You sure you can afford this?" And Kit replies, "We buns. I got a teaching job at the art college back home, which is even worse than it was when I was there. But on top of the freelance stuff, it keeps me doing all right." And then John looks down at the food on her plate and he says, "Tell you what, I can't believe you turned vegetarian." And Kit says, "My sister got me into it. I'm sharing a place with her at the minute." And then John thinks for a second and asks, "Is that Karen?" And Kit answers, "Claire." And then John cuts a big piece of steak, and as he's about to put it in his mouth, he says, Claire, right." And it seems like John probably hasn't had a steak for a while because he's literally just staring at the piece on his fork, and Kit sees this and asks, "So how's the rare filet steak and red wine butter?" And John kind of laughs and says, "Exactly how it should be, if you can remember what that is. How's the cauliflower, zucchini, and the cabbage sauce with extra radish beans or whatever?" Then he gets kind of a devilish look on his face, and he holds out his fork with the meat on it to her, and she can't resist. As she goes to take a bite of it, she says, "Evil, evil man." Then we turn the page and we cut to the end of their meal where both are having either tea or coffee. And it seems like John has told her everything that's happened over the last year or so. And Kit is saying, "That'd be a pretty wild year for anyone but you, I suppose." And John says, "Had its moments. What about you then? How's Belfast?" And Kit replies, "Jumpin'. I'm enjoying being back home, you know. I was away long enough to get a fresh perspective on the place, and I'm really getting into the painting again instead of just doing it for money. But that's not really what you're interested in hearing about, is it?" And it seems she is correct. John looks at her like he wants her to spill the beans and says, "So?" And she answers, "So I've been out with 2 or 3 fellas, but nothing serious has happened. And I've got this wee disaster area who shows up from time to time and tells me he loves me, but only when he's paralytic." And John interjects, "Needs to be mothered." And Kit replies saying, "Needs to have been hit a bloody sight harder when he was wee." Then there's a pause for a second, and she looks up at John and says, "So nothing's worked out for me at all. And here I am, back to find you." And John doesn't really say anything to this, and that kind of creates an awkward pause. So Kit pays for the meal and asks John if he wants to get a drink down the road. And John still doesn't say anything, but he does get up and he gets his coat on and he begins to walk with her. And I guess he's kind of working up the courage to say what he wants to say. So finally he does, and he says, "Kit, when we ended it, right, it broke me clean in two. I've never gone as low as I did after I walked out of your place last year. I don't know if you remember this, but I told you I'd never got so close to anyone or felt so good. And I told you I'd never talked to anyone that way before in my life. Well, that's even more true now. You came back to find me. Here I am. Whatever you want to do, wherever you want to go, just say the word and I'll do it. You want me to leave London and give up the magic, even knock off the blood and Silcut? No problem. Anything. Anything at all. I'm yours." And he grabs her by the shoulders and he brings her close. But as she stares up at him, a tear forms in her eye, and she says, "I'm sorry." And at this, John gets very angry, and he turns away from her, and he pushes his body against the concrete wall of the restaurant they just walked out of. And as he does this, Kit yells, John!" But John replies, "No, I don't want it. I don't want sorry. I don't want just friends." And Kit tries to interject again, saying, "John!" But he just walks off and says, "No, it's just bollocks is what it is. Just like bloody last time. I make an absolute bloody tit of myself, and all I get at the end is shafted." But Kit is not one to back down from a fight, so she yells back at John, "Constantine, stop your frickin' gearnin' and listen to me, or everything we've had will be frickin' shite, and it's your frickin' fault." And this stops John in his tracks, and he turns back and looks at her very sourly. But then we turn the page, and we see that they're in a pub sitting at a table. And John is looking at her drink, I'm assuming awkwardly trying to figure out what to say. So he says, "I thought all you drank was Guinness." And Kit replies, "It's gone rancid on us in the Crown. After that, I just lost the taste in general, I suppose. You off the G&Ts?" And John replies, "I'm not in the mood." Then there's another awkward pause, and then Kit asks John, "You in the mood to tell me about Sarah?" If you don't remember, Sarah is John's current lady friend, or at least she was. I'm not sure if they're still going out, because she was very angry that John was forcing Helen to detox. So when she asked this, John gets kind of an annoyed look on his face and he says, "My mate Chaz." And Kit tries to explain, saying, "Oh, you know what he's like. He let it slip and then I just kept on him till he told me the lot. And don't you go being mad of him because of it, all right?" And John doesn't seem too angered anymore and he says, Right. Then there's a pause like he's trying to figure out what to say. And then he says, "Sarah and me are over. You won't believe this, but she really had slipped me mind." And then Kit says, "I do believe you, and that's the trouble. I mean, what else slipped your mind? Do you not remember why it didn't work before? Because of all the stuff you get into? I'll bet you're up to your neck in some scam right now, and I know you probably forgot about it the minute you saw me, but you're still doing it, aren't you?" And then John looks at her with very guilty eyes. And then there's a panel of just black that has narration over it, and it seems like this narration is what John wants to say to her, but he doesn't say it to her. He just narrates to us saying, "I got Heather killed. I did such a good job of getting Helen off the smack that she was raped. I had a bloke crippled for life last night, and the devil's just about one step away from nailing my soul to the wall." But like I said, he doesn't say any of that out loud. He just closes his eyes and says, "Yeah." So it seems even though John had said all that stuff about him doing anything to get her back, he knows that that's all just talk and that he can't just give up everything he's doing. So now that he's made that realization, Kit tries to break the ice a little bit and says, "Can I come around to sit beside you?" So she moves over to the booth side that John is sitting on, and she sits next to him at the table. And she asks John, "Do you remember the first time I met you at Brendan's?" And then John lights a cigarette and says, "Oh, yeah." And she continues, "Well, you know how we were talking about the future? And Brendan, being Brendan, had this theory about life as a vast song, staggering to its conclusion. He said, how can you guess what the last verse might be? But you don't want to spoil the surprise, right?" And John says, "I remember." And she continues, "He was an awful old liar, John. He knew fine well what the last verse was. He was going to drink himself to death, and nothing I could do or say would stop him. Eventually, I gave up. I packed my bags and left. And the day I did, I begged him to lay off the drink. Well, he was half cut anyway, and he gave me this droopy grin and he said, 'Oh, sure, I know I've had it, but I'll play this bloody thing out to the end anyway. And maybe at the end, I'll manage a wee smile among the tears.' He was proud of himself. He saw this boozer's nobility in what he was doing. An Irish inevitability. That's what he called it. So I looked at this wee man with his face all red with burst blood vessels and the glass of Bushmills shaking in his hand, and I just thought, Jesus Christ, I've never heard of anything so bloody horrible." And John looks at her kind of sad and says, You never told me that before." And she replies, "I couldn't. I knew you looked up to him a bit." And she begins to cry and says, "You see, John, when I saw Brendan do that to himself, and I heard his friggin' stupid reason for it, I swore I'd never get involved with a man like that again. All he did with his life was try and end it a bit quicker every waking moment. And then you come along, and I had to break up with you because, oh God, John, I know you're doing exactly the same thing he did in your own way. But she can't finish her sentence. She just leans forward crying into John, and he embraces her and says, "It's okay." But still burying her head in his chest, she says, "No, I couldn't forget you. It's been over a year, but I just couldn't. We ended it so badly. I have to get on with my life, but I can't do it without seeing you, John. I came back to look for you, to say goodbye." Then we turn the page and we cut to a hotel bed and breakfast. And we get a bit of narration as we look at the outside of this building, and it says, "Because she has her life to live, and I've whatever's coming to me." Then we cut to Kit's room inside of this bed and breakfast, and she's standing and John is sitting on the bed, and she's saying to John, "You should have seen the look on your face." And John looks up questioningly, and she kind of smiles and says, "When I told you I'd had all the kisses I wanted in Belfast." But John doesn't say anything to this. He just grabs her hand and he pulls her into him, and they kiss. Then we cut to the two of them passionately making love, and it's like a page and a half of panels of this. So it seems like John and Kit kind of know this is the last time they're ever going to make love, and they're really going all out. So when they finish, we get some narration that says, "She falls asleep, humming, nearly whimpering, a rainy night in Soho. It's her favorite." Then we get some lyrics from the song A Rainy Night in Soho by the Pogues, and it reads, "Now this song is nearly over. We may never find out what it means, but there's a light I hold before me, and you're the measure of my dreams, the measure of my dreams." Then we turn the page and we see John is still asleep in bed, but Kit is standing next to him and she's packed already, and it looks like she's probably just saying a goodbye to him in her head. And as she goes to walk out the door, John actually does wake up and he turns over to see her walking away, but she must hear the rustling on the bed because she turns back and looks at him, and he holds out his hand to her, and she smiles and walks out the door. And we're left with John just laying in the bed by himself, and the narration says, "In my dream, I don't just reach out to her. I tell her I love her as well. Then I wake up." Then we cut to John later that morning as he's sitting in a diner eating his breakfast, and his narration says, "What wakes me is the B&B owner banging on the door, this little everyone's granddad bloke, telling me the bill's only paid till noon. He sees my face and he jumps to the wrong conclusion. 'Come on, son, hardly worth crying about.' I laugh so hard, he nearly phones the nut house." And we can see in the diner that everybody is watching the TV, which is showing the news. And we can see on the screen behind the reporter that there are fires and police running into areas with batons. And the reporter is saying, "Shows no signs of abating. In the last minute, another 5 van loads of police officers have arrived on the scene. And I've just been informed that the number of dead has risen to 40. In a hurried statement, a police spokesman revealed that only half of the Tower Hamlets area is currently under their control. He called the rioters vicious and determined criminals and said that they are only interested in spreading chaos and misery. Their motives go no deeper than that. The same officer, apparently unaware he was still in earshot, was then heard to refer to the rioters as savages out of a bloody jungle. And of course, John is hearing this news report as well, and as he's sitting there thinking, his narration says, "I need Nige. I got a second plan up and running when I nicked the pages from the Caligula Club. If the snob couldn't take the bastard head on, we'd do him in the back. But I should have had word by now. Nige is my only chance to get in touch, psychically like. Sod it. I need to get out of here anyway, before some wanker looks at the pictures on the Google box, engages mouth, not brain, and says." But John's thoughts are cut off as one of the other patrons in the diner does exactly what John was worried about and says about the riots. "Just right, too, if you ask me, sodden blacks." Except he didn't say blacks. He says a different word that is derogatory that I'm not sure I'm allowed to say. But John doesn't really do anything. He just stands up and gets out of there as fast as he can. And as we turn the page, we see he's made it into the Tower Hamlets, and he's sneaking around trying not to get seen by either police or rioters because there's so much chaos going on either side that he's likely to be attacked by any of the groups. So as he walks through all this chaos going on, the narration says, "Takes me 5 hours to get within a mile of Nige's flat, picking me way through cordons and barricades and the best of human endeavor, past people being all they can be. There it is, in sharpish, for Christ's sake. Back when I was a real hotshot, I saved the world a couple of times, more by luck than judgment, and letting some other poor sod do the difficult bits." Then John turns down a street he shouldn't have, where he sees some police beginning to gather, so he turns around quickly and hides, and his narration continues saying, "Shit, this is where they're having the showdown. Get inside, get in, get in." And it seems like right outside of Nigel's flat, there's a big confrontation between the residents of the Hamlet area and the police. And we see a helicopter fly in and put a spotlight on the rioters. And John's narration continues. "Never a dull moment, living life at ground zero. But I still did it. Kept the world turning and humanity off the menu. Haven't a sodden clue why." And he's saying that very cynically because he's looking at the police and rioters about to kill each other. So he's feeling a bit nihilistic right now. So John walks into the apartment building of Nigel, and as he's walking, he's seeing more horrible things inside. We see a policeman that has blown his brains out. We see a dog hanging from the ceiling and children looking at it. We see a man drinking from a puddle of blood. And it seems that as John is going up to Nigel's apartment, these horrific scenes of violence are getting more and more odd. I would say mostly it started with the guy drinking from the puddle of blood. The dog and the policeman's suicide seem like they could have been happening just from the chaos outside. But something really is going on as John gets in the elevator, and as it goes up, we see someone's face and fingers try to push through the back wall of the elevator behind John. It's very Freddy Krueger, and John doesn't even seem to notice, but possibly he's trying to play it cool. Because as his floor is reached and he gets off the elevator, he sees another man sewing up his eyelids. There's a baby carriage on the floor that has what looks like a heroin needle next to it, and you can kind of see what looks like potentially a baby's shadow behind the fallen carriage. But John doesn't really acknowledge any of this, so like I said, I think he's trying to play it cool because he knows something supernatural is going on. So John finally arrives at Nigel's apartment, and he knocks on the door, and he doesn't get an answer, so he calls out, "Right, Nige?" And then he pushes the door, which just happens to be unlocked. So he walks in and he says, "Nige? Nige, it's me. You on the Kazi or something?" And then he makes it into the living room of Nigel's apartment, and he sees Nigel laying on the coffee table. But Nige isn't moving, and there's something on his forehead. So as John walks over to Nigel, he notices that there's blood coming out from underneath the coffee table, and he bends down to look under it, and he sees a nail that's sticking out from under the table, and Nigel's blood is dripping from it. So it seems someone has driven a nail through Nigel's head and nailed him to the table. But John doesn't really react right away. He just walks out to the balcony, and he stares out at Tower Hamlets burning, and it finally hits him. Nigel's dead, and his backup plan seems to have fallen through. And as John holds his head in his hands, the first of the fallen walks out behind him and says, "My kind of town." And that, my friends, is the end of the issue. They leave us hanging on that, and I think I've mentioned it in the last couple issues, but with next issue, that ends this storyline and the Garth Ennis run of Hellblazer. And I don't know about you, but this whole run has been quite a crazy ride, but I've loved every minute of it. But we'll have to wait until next time to see how this story ends. So until then, if you guys have any comments, questions, or suggestions, you can email me at planestrains and comicbooks, all one word, @gmail.com. And we will see you on the next one.